ARE Podcast, Season 1, Episode 9.
Welcome to the ARE Podcast. ARE Podcast, where it's all about encouraging and inspiring you today so you can fulfill your dream of becoming a licensed architect tomorrow. And now your host, David Doucette.
Hello. Welcome to another episode of the ARE Podcast, and I'm joined with our co-host, Eric Corey Freed. How are you, Eric?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, and actually we have the biggest Apple fanboy with us and the biggest green architect, so this topic is topical for him.
In the same person. You're talking about me.
I'm talking about you with the Pitch Perfect 2 cup that you just drank some water out of. So, yeah, this is one you were really excited to talk about. So let's do that. First off, follow us on Instagram at Architect Prep, and we do weekly giveaways there.
It makes David very happy if you follow us on Instagram. He sends me daily updates of our number of followers.
I love Instagram. So much better than Facebook. So Apple had their event last week, and of the two of us, you're probably the bigger Apple fanboy, although we both have probably equally the amount of Apple products. Do you have an Apple Watch?
Oh, yeah.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, I love it. I'm not wearing it now, but
it's just...
Yeah, I love it. And when I don't wear it, I feel like I forgot something.
Do you? It's just never been my thing. Never had a desire for it. Anyway, so that's right then. You are the bigger fanboy of us two. So let's talk about their new headquarters. That's really what we're going to talk about today. What they are calling, Apple is calling, Tim Cook is calling, the greenest building in the world, which is interesting because I know you have a lot of data on this because you are the data guy. But just the fact alone that it's 2.8 million square feet of office space, and they have the audacity to call that the greenest building in the world. It's huge. The footprint is huge.
It not only is it huge, I imagine everybody has seen it at least once. They call it the spaceship. I call it the silver donut, but it's a giant. It looks like a spaceship landed in a field. It's a huge office building.
And where exactly is it located?
It is located in Cupertino, California, not far from their original headquarters, which is also the very same town that Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak created Apple in their parents' garage. So Cupertino, by default, became the headquarters of Apple simply because Steve Jobs and Woz grew up there. And Cupertino is a sleepy little town south of the Bay Area. It's not, it's not San Francisco, which is a big, exciting city. It's not Palo Alto, which houses Stanford University. It's little dinky Cupertino that otherwise nobody ever would have heard of if not for Apple. So kind of keep that context in mind. Most of Cupertino are auto malls, basically. There's no there. They don't even have a real downtown. And I know. I'm sure somebody's going to say, "I grew up there and it's cool," but it's not. It's
so
it is a little town you normally would just drive through and never even pay attention to.
So this literally is like a spaceship that just landed in Cupertino, essentially.
Yeah. And by the way, when the Steves were growing up, Cupertino was nothing but apple and orange orchards. It was all farmland essentially.
I had a CSE candidate. It's got to be about 3 years ago. Come to one of the CSE seminars, and he was working on this project for Foster and Partners, and I think he was in the London office, if I remember right. But obviously, you couldn't say too much about it other than it's just like it's amazing, and it's the coordination, and it's just crazy. So. Let's talk about some of the stats. $5 billion construction price tag. That's B with a B. I mean, that's B with a B. Yeah, that's B with a B.
And by the way, that's it. That's the rough estimate that the media is putting together. Apple is under no obligation to release the final numbers yet, anyway. And DPR did most of the construction but I don't know if there were other construction management at risk firms involved in that.
Do you know when they started? It's got to be 3 years ago, at least.
Well, they started they started planning for it in 2011, and there's even a video online of Steve Jobs making his appeal to the Cupertino City Council.
Oh wow!
And it's one of the last videos of him alive, essentially talking about the spaceship. And a lot of people were joking that it's the last product he got to sell was their new headquarters.
Right.
So after Tim Cook dedicated a fair amount of time in his keynote last week talking about the spaceship when he could have been talking about the new iPhone 10, the Twitterverse had exploded because you could almost hear the collective eye rolling of all the sustainability nerds on Twitter, myself included, saying, "Greenest building in the world? Come on now. Let's break that apart." So I want to talk about the good part of it, and then the part that maybe is not so good.
Well, and then the initial reaction from the green building geeks during his keynote was it because the building is so massive, and some of those numbers we'll get into, that it's an oxymoron to call it green just because of its footprint. Is that kind of the basis of people like, what?
Yeah, the initial basis is, come on, it's a friggin' suburban office park surrounded by parking lot.
Right.
How can that be the greenest? Is really this the epitome of what we're all going for? A giant corporate office building for a for-profit company that's clad in titanium, no less, and then surrounded by parking? Is that really it? It's got to
Right.
be more than that.
Right. Okay, so 2.8 million square feet of office space. That sounds a lot to me, but put it into perspective for me.
It's a big building. It's basically more interior space than the entire Empire State Building. Imagine if you took the Empire State Building, laid it on its side, and bent it into a donut, it would be bigger than that.
How many stories is the spaceship? Do we know?
I think it's 3.
Okay. So then, yeah. So if we're pancaking the Empire State Building and spreading it in a donut, and we're saying we're 3 stories, the thing's got to be a massive footprint.
Yeah, and because it's a donut with a hollowed out center, the donut hole is big. Just the donut hole,
right?
Which they've filled with all of these plants, and a lot of them are fruit bearing trees.
Is the hole enclosed or is it totally open?
Totally open.
Oh, okay. All right, so it's got more interior space than the Empire State Building. Well, let me ask you this. Are you excited does this excite you? Were you more excited about the announcement of the building than you were the iPhone 8 or X, as I like to call it, but I know it's iPhone 10. And as you said, I don't know what happened to 9, but...
Poor iPhone 9.
I was going to get the iPhone 9.
Nobody... Well, you still can because it doesn't exist. No, I wasn't more excited about the building. I was excited because they were also claiming that they put in the same painstaking details into the building that they put into their products. And the media that we're getting to see a part of the campus for the first time were saying the details are incredible. So in the Steve Jobs Theater alone, it's a carbon fiber roof that looks monolithic. There are no columns holding this up. All of the glass surrounding the building, which is just it's a dome with, in a circle plan, is structural glass. And then between the glass, although it looks like butt jointed glass with no mullion, in between that joint they ran conduit for plumbing and electrical. So essentially there are no walls holding up a giant carbon fiber roof. It looks like it's floating on the glass. I mean, that's pretty impressive detail.
Right.
And Foster and Partners had engineered special plumbing and electrical conduits to fit between the sheets of glass, which are probably an inch thick.
Yeah, I can imagine having the privilege to work on that project, although I wonder if all the architects and interns and drafters feel the same way. This is the kind of project you're on for years,
Yeah, and that's just the theater building,
right?
Which is a small little afterthought in the campus. The theater building also, they didn't want exposed sprinkler heads, but it's an assembly building. Remember, it's a theater, and it holds, I think, 1,100 people. So they made custom-made sprinkler heads, and so the ceiling has these concentric ring patterns on the ceiling, and the sprinkler heads are built into that track. So you can't see sprinkler heads per se, but if the sprinklers go off, it just comes through those concentric grooves.
Wow.
It's pretty wild. And then there's an elevator that takes you upstairs, and the elevator is surrounded by glass, and the tracks for the elevator are in a helix like DNA. So when the elevator rises, it turns. It's pretty wild. I mean, just architecturally, if Apple wasn't even tied to it alone, you'd probably be paying attention just to this little theater, let alone the spaceship that's right next door to it.
Exactly.
So if that's the level of detail in the theater building, I can only imagine what else awaits in the rest of the campus, which not a lot of people have seen yet.
I was going to say, it sounds like you've been there already.
It feels that way, doesn't it? No, I haven't been there yet.
All right, so it's clad in the world's largest panels of curved glass. Does that impress me? I don't know.
Well, a glass building in California, which has a lot of sun, is that the smartest from a sustainable design strategy? Well, you're going to get a lot of heat gain. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know, because in order to make that glass work, it would have to be double or triple pane from an insulation standpoint. It would have to be coated with some sort of low-E coating. There are overhangs a little bit, but still.
And we don't know any of the details on that glass because obviously it's a huge component to the building, and they have the audacity to call it the greenest building in the world. So they must have some story for how the glass is, not letting in the heat or something like that.
Right, and it's on a 175 acre campus, mind you. That's all in addition to the new, the existing campus that they've been on for 30 years.
All right, and they planted more than 6,000 trees. Again, I don't know if that one impresses me or not. I don't know how many trees they killed to, level the site, or maybe this was in a field. I don't know.
It was a site with a series of existing crappy buildings on it.
Okay.
And so they certainly, from a sustainability perspective, they certainly improved the site in terms of footprint. They've restored more nature than was there previously. And then most of the parking, I should say, is somewhat underground. And then they covered over it. And so that part's pretty impressive as well.
Yeah, we'll get to the parking in a second. The world's largest naturally ventilated building. Where'd you get that one from?
I got that from the Wall Street Journal.
Wow.
And so that's the claim that Apple's making. The thinking is that because it's passively ventilated, they would not need heating or air conditioning for 9 months out of the year. Now, we don't know if that's true yet because they haven't occupied the space yet. We'll see after the first year of real numbers. But if that's true, that's pretty impressive in a building that must be filled with computers, and computers give off a lot of heat. People give off a lot of heat. Even LED lights give off a little, not as much as incandescents, but even all the LED lighting they have in the building probably gives off a fair amount of heat. So the base load of just heat gain in an all-glass building in sunny Cupertino, California, saying it wouldn't need heating in the winter or air conditioning in the summer for most of the year, for 3/4 of the year, that's a wild claim. And if it's true, that's like, wow, good for you. That's impressive.
How long before we know that's true, and you think we'll get any follow-up to that 2 years down the road?
Well, there will be follow-up because Apple has also this incredible environmental department that's led by a former head of the EPA, mind you. So she's really on the case. That's why the Twitterverse blew up, because okay, you're telling me it's the greenest office building, it's the greenest building in the world, period, but it's got all this glass and it's naturally ventilated, but it's filled with computers and lighting and people, and it's so green, but 12,000 employees are going to have to drive to it every day, or get there somehow, right? So So that's why everybody was kind of going back and forth. And also, I will admit there's also just the usual Apple bashing that anything they put out, there's always going to be a whole group of people on social media that just want to tear it down. I'm certainly not in that camp, but
the best one was I am an Apple fanboy. I've become less so over the years. I love the products. I use them every day. But one of the best was in terms of the Apple bashing. One of my friends posted, "Oh my God, a glass back. Oh my God, wireless charging. Oh my God, the screen goes to the edges. Oh my God, wait, that's my Galaxy S8 or S7, whatever the hell it was Samsung had a year ago, or the Android platform, some of the things that Android did 2 years ago. So Apple is the master of marketing. We all know that. And we know, oftentimes they just copy what Samsung has done and sometimes do it better. With that, I did notice, getting on the phone tangent, somebody saying how they, the battle between Apple and Android will forever go on. But it was an Android user who, was saying that he may switch back to Apple, and he's an IT guy and he does a lot of stuff for the office with Android phones, and it's buggy and it's unstable, and he says the Apple stuff is stable. You can't customize it as much, but it's just much more stable. So it's, apples to oranges. So
wait, did you just say apples to oranges?
I did, because it is. They're not oranges and oranges. It's apples to oranges. One's an apple, one's an orange.
That's cute that you just made an unintended pun.
But wait, before we get back to the building, are you going to get the 8, or are you going to get the 8 Plus, or are you going to get the 10?
The 10, all right, if you really want to get into it, the 10, as much as I would like to make stupid emojis and send them to my kid, it's got this weird little notch in the front where the camera is that every time you look at it, it's kind of covering the screen.
Makes no sense. Like, what are they thinking?
And that would trigger my OCD so much that I wouldn't be able to enjoy it ever.
Yeah, I remember one of the early leaks, was about that, showing that, and the 10 just doesn't seem to be much different than the 8. Or I think that, is it the 8 Plus and the 10 are similar? And because I think the 8 Plus has a few things the 8 doesn't. Is that right?
Well, they both have True Tone color rendition, which I really like. So you can look at pictures accurately and it adjusts based on sunlight. So there's things like that. I'm honestly, I'm probably not going to upgrade because my 6S is working great and I don't need to.
Right.
As much as I want the phone, I'm like, I don't really need it.
Right. I've got the 6, and it's got a little bit of the bezel thing is coming up, and they've tried to fix it. There's a little bit of light leak. All justification to get a new phone, right?
Sure.
I might get the Plus. I might get the 8 Plus. I'm thinking I want a little bigger phone. I use the thing so much that, as you get older, the eyes aren't what they used to be. I'm thinking maybe that 8 Plus will look nice. I don't know. It's ridiculously expensive. That's the thing.
Yeah, but my wife had the Plus, the 6S Plus, and she's a klutz, as you know, and so she kept dropping it all the time. And the bigger screen didn't mean the resolution was any higher; it just meant more screen real estate. So it was nice for watching movies, but otherwise, she was so clumsy in her tiny hands that, she hated it, and so. As soon as she was able to upgrade, we just got her a new one a few months ago. Oh,
what'd you get her? Just the regular 6S?
Yeah, I got her the 6S normal size with extra memory, so she could have all of her apps on it.
Sounds like maybe you should get her a flip phone if she's that clumsy.
I was teasing her. I was gonna get her the Jitterbug, which they advertise for old people with the giant buttons. It's just a little flip phone for elderly folks, which I got my dad. So. But anyway, let's get back to the building. Yeah, let's get back to the building.
So, all right, world's largest naturally ventilated building. That remains to be seen. But you're right, it is impressive if a building of that size can actually meet the claims that they're claiming, and that remains to be seen. Net zero energy. Is it a net zero energy building?
Well, now this is also pretty interesting for everybody. It's designed to be a net zero energy building, because nobody's occupied it yet.
which actually, so it's been net zero so far. What exactly explain net zero energy is?
Net zero energy means that at the end of a year period, you've produced more energy than you've consumed. That's really what it means. So you haven't all the energy is produced on site. Now, mind you, energy is produced during the day when the sun is up. At night, it's pulling energy off the grid. So generally what we do is we design it with solar panels. The solar panels produce more energy than it uses during the day. It puts the extra back into the grid. We don't store them in batteries really anymore. And then at night when you need energy, it pulls it off. But the idea is that it zeroes out, that those solar panels have ultimately produced however many kilowatts you've used in that year. And the reason we use a year is because in summertime we use more energy than in the winter because of air conditioning.
Right. And
now, so it's designed to be net zero energy. We can calculate the energy load on a building pretty accurately nowadays. There are plugins for SketchUp even. There's one called Sapphira, which I'm giving them a free plug, I guess. But there's, if you're interested, there's all these great energy modeling programs that you can take your existing BIM model or your existing SketchUp model and and run an energy model on it based on things. Apple's Donut spaceship has a 17 megawatt solar array around the perimeter of that building. 17 megawatts is huge.
17 sounds small to me. 17 anything just sounds small. So
focus on the mega portion of the megawatt. To give you a sense of scale, a typical house, like a house that you and I would live in, or anybody listening would live in, would have anywhere from a 3 to a 5 kilowatt array.
Okay.
This is a 17 megawatt array. That means it's. Let me just check my math.
I was just going to say, well, I want to ask you too while you're checking there. Is it all around the roof of the building? Is it elsewhere on site, or is it mainly on the roof of the building?
No, they have it on the roof of the building, and then they have pergolas around the site as well. So this will be a more impressive number. It's a 17,000 kilowatt array. So if a typical house is 3 to 5 kilowatts, this is 17,000.
Do you know how much the array is in Ivanpah there, out south of Vegas? They have 3 huge. All right, I'll send it to you offline. They have 3 huge solar facilities out there. It's just on the Nevada-California border, just south of Primm. The area gets a lot of press because of the way they have it set up, and they have these 3 kind of, I think, like cooling towers. But it gets so hot because of the array is so large that the birds, once they kind of fly into the zone, they just fry and die. And so there's thousands of birds killed each year because of this big solar array.
Yeah, but it probably smells really good, like fried chicken when you go by there.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I roll down my windows every time I drive by.
Just take a deep breath and you get hungry.
All right, so they have a huge solar array on their roof. We don't know. We don't know if it's net zero energy yet. They can claim it, but you figure how many employees are working there? 12,000, something like that.
Yeah, between 11 to 12,000 will have to go there every day.
And let's just say that's 12,000 computers with generating electricity, generating all that stuff. That's just. I mean, my computers and my external drives and the crap I have around here generate heat if they're kind of too enclosed. I can't imagine.
Yes, and now those are off-the-shelf computers, not to mention the fact that probably on-site they would have a fair amount of server rooms too, just to run their internal stuff, and they would keep it under the same roof for privacy and security reasons. So there's got to be server rooms. Those generate an enormous amount of heat. Now, Apple has pioneered some cool stuff with their data centers with water-cooled technology, not using air conditioning. But still, it can only do so much.
And it did get a LEED Platinum certification from the USBGC, is that correct? Which is the top.
Well, it hasn't been awarded yet because they haven't technically finished construction yet, but they expect to get LEED Platinum from USGBC.
Which is the top. That's the highest.
Which is the highest on LEED.
Right.
When I was with Living Future, I had pitched Apple about making this a Living Building Challenge building, which is way up here. And once they looked at the materials credits and so forth, they realized they wouldn't be able to achieve it.
Oh, interesting.
But they could get net zero if after a year's worth of data comes in, they could get a net zero energy certification from Living Future, which they should do. And it's pretty easy to do. It's just, here's your utility bills and here's what we produced on site.
I think maybe that is what's most interesting of all of this is Apple has made some lofty claims of this really gigantic office park. But as you're saying, they have an environmental department. Maybe this is something that will be kind of like a case study or a teaching model, or hopefully that they will, put out these results of energy consumption and their net zero energy. Maybe they'll do that on a yearly basis or something. That would be great, because it would be interesting to see if it's going to live up to the claims.
They have been doing it with their solar powered data centers, which they typically locate in states that have cheaper energy. So they have a huge solar powered data center in South Carolina. They have one in Oregon, here in Oregon, because of their rules about net zero energy and metering and so forth. It's a big, but on the other hand, it's a building that's 1 mile in circumference, right? It's giant. It's a giant spaceship, and to see pictures doesn't really give it the scale of 1 mile in circumference. That's 5,280 feet around. That's a lot.
That's a lot. And, if the average person takes, 20 minutes to walk a mile, it would take you 20 minutes to walk around that building. Think about that when you step out to lunch next time and you walk down and get your bagel in the morning.
There's, I have some other numbers. It's 4 stories above ground. There are 3 stories below. So it does that Pentagon thing where it's kind of got a little bit hidden below ground. There's 4,400 hollow concrete slabs that act as the building's floor, ceilings, and HVAC system. So they use hollow out prefab slabs with the cores done that act as an underfloor plenum.
Okay, so that's where they're running a lot of their duct work. How many slabs? 4,400?
Yes, and that's a lot. There's 2,600 parking spaces in the underground parking garage, and the rest are above ground. There's 1,000 on-site car charging stations for electric vehicles. There's 1,500 bikes on campus, which just the employees grab and use, and they're probably beautifully designed bikes.
Is that just for getting around campus?
Just for campus, yeah. And if you visit the Googleplex, they have the same thing. Their bikes are all colored in Google colors, like red and yellow. And blue. No. Just walk. You don't need. Just walk. If it's just for on-campus travel, just walk. If it takes, remember, it's 175 acres, the full campus. Sometimes, if you're late for a meeting, you got to hop on a bike and.
Well, just walk. You know what? The biggest homage to Steve Jobs would to get rid of those bikes and make them walk. That's what he did. That's how he did all his meetings. He walked around Stanford. Not a fan of the biking, but that's if you're biking to work, that's great. But just as a bike to get around campus, no, just walk. There,
it also houses 7 cafes. 3,000 people can be seated in the largest cafe, which is 3 stories high, and there's 1,750 seats in the outdoor terraces. So you could basically eat in a bunch of places and sit outside and be among all of these trees they've planted.
Do you know, obviously there's going to be a lot of curiosity this building and people are going to want to visit. Is this going to be like Fort Knox? Like you can't get past the front gate if you're not an Apple employee? Do you know? Are they doing like visitor tours stuff?
No, they have a whole visitor center with its own mini Apple store within it that hasn't opened yet. But you can go and buy a MacBook Pro right from headquarters, right from the mothership.
Design
as well as special Apple gear. They also, in the cafeteria, this is kind of a funny aside, they invented a pizza box that holds pizza that apparently keeps the pizza warm and but also keeps it from getting soggy. And it was such an innovative idea for this pizza box that they patented it, and you can see the patent online. And by the way, the pizza box is round, just like the spaceship building.
I'm not even thinking about the innovation of the pizza box. I'm thinking of the fact that you even know this. Like, why do you even know that?
Well, it's funny because the space it takes up in my brain is normally would be taken up by like things like my wife's birthday.
Right. Right.
So
exactly.
I just don't have room for that.
All right. So we have 11,000 parking spaces. You said what? 1,300 were below ground, something like that. But
Yeah.
so 11. So 9,000 and change are above ground. That's a lot. That's what 1.8 million square feet off the top of my head. I'm just calculating this. It's in the show notes. So 1 million square feet for spaces alone. That's a lot.
That's just for the spaces. Now remember, a parking space is 8 feet by 20 feet. So yeah, it's 11,000 parking spaces times 160 square feet each space. Yeah, it's 1.8 million square feet just for the spaces alone, not to mention all the drive aisles and
wow,
ramps and everything else. That's a lot for a car.
Well, not only is that a lot, that's a lot of heat absorption. What do we call that?
Heat island effect.
Yeah, heat island effect. I mean, how are you going to counteract that?
Well, to give you a sense of scale, the new headquarters has 3.4 million square feet of offices and laboratories. Just the part dedicated to its main function, offices and labs. 3.4 million for that, 3.5 million for the car parks.
Wow.
So the car parks are getting technically a little more space, 100,000 square feet more than the function of the building. Now, who's to blame for that? Is it Apple's fault? Because they built it to the parking minimums as per the city of Cupertino. The zoning code,
right,
has parking minimums as everybody's has to deal with. Apple's not immune to those, so maybe it's really a discussion that it's not Apple's fault, but the idea that we still have a zoning code based on having parking minimums, that you have to have this many parking spaces whether you want them or not.
Well, that's a good point. It is a discussion, and for any of you or us who've dealt with renovations, new construction, whether it's commercial or even at the residential level in dense neighborhoods, parking is such a difficult thing. I know when I was doing a lot of work in Venice, part of LA there, a lot of people, if they were moving their garage and back or something, they had to actually provide another on-site parking spot in their house. It was if they got rid of the curb cut in the front, which they had to get rid of, they needed, I forget exactly what it was, but it was not in their favor because parking is such a premium.
Right, and it's and what's funny about it is it's ironically not encouraging the behavior that cities like that want. Right, they end up discouraging curb cuts, which maybe they want that, maybe they don't, but it ends up adding unnecessary space that people don't need. And when I was on the Sustainability Commission for the city of Palm Desert, California, one of the things that we did was we changed it from parking minimums to parking maximums, because parking wasn't making anybody happier, and there was way too much parking in that city because it's a suburban nothing.
Right. Well, that's what I'm wondering here, and I'm sure Apple had the conversations, the architects had the conversations with the city of, can we do less parking spaces? Which the city could allow that. I mean, they have the authority to do that. But I'm wondering, this 11,000 parking spaces, is this coming from Apple saying we need this many, or is this the city saying, no, you need a minimum of that based on your building?
Well, Apple, more so than probably other tech companies that are similar, because remember, they're all kind of clustered together down there in the peninsula below San Francisco. Apple is incredibly dedicated to trying to reduce car use among its employees. Not only does it offer shuttle service all over the place, as does Google, as does Oracle, as does a lot of them. But currently, 28% of their employees don't take single-use cars to work. They either bike or they take the shuttle.
Wow, 28%.
Right, which is pretty high. That means, more than a quarter, 1 in 4 employees are not driving to work. Their goal is to get it to 34%, and part of that was the negotiation with the city. If they don't achieve that 34% in a certain time, there's potential penalties for the company, which they can afford, but there's potential penalties for the company if they don't meet that 34%. That's pretty wild. That means a third of all employees are not driving to this suburban campus that's surrounded by parking.
That's interesting. That has 11,000 spaces.
That has 11,000 spaces, which were based on minimums set by the city, not by Apple.
Right, exactly. And if Apple meets their say of third, what's a third of 12? 4,000. So that would be 8. They need 8,000. So there's an extra 3,000 parking spaces, which is a lot.
And by the way, the whole thing is so easy to drive to because the entire town of Cupertino is nestled along a little highway. So as you're taking the 280 south, which is kind of one of the two main highways through the San Francisco Bay Area, there's this splinter highway coming off it, and Cupertino is like hugged up against this thing, and so it's almost begging to be driven to.
Is there even a little downtown or a little quaint out at northern Santa Barbara area? Any of that stuff?
No, not really. But there's a little town called Campbell, which does have a very cute downtown, which kind of people go to. Okay. And I'm sure people are going to email me and complain about that, but it's true. They look it up. It's so here's a suburban campus right by a freeway, and they currently have more than a quarter of their employees not driving to work, and their goal is to get to a third. That's, in a certain sense, that's pretty impressive. And I know we want green buildings to be all or nothing, but I love this incremental improvement, year after year improvement, and so I'm pretty impressed by that.
It is interesting. It's a conundrum of not even just in the green building world, but I think just our effects of humans on the planet. We all want to leave a smaller footprint, but we're all procreating and populating. Apple's this huge company. They want to do this new building right. They want to make it green, but by the nature of the size that it has to be, it's not like they could make a smaller building based on the 12,000 employees that they need, and so it's an interesting dichotomy, I guess.
12,000 employees, 11,000 parking spaces. That means there's one space for every 1.35 employees. That's an incredibly great, or as Steve Jobs would say, insanely great ratio for any company. Because normally it's the exact opposite. It's almost like 2 parking spaces for every employee. But some of the greenest buildings in the world that I consider green have 0 parking. The Bullitt Center in Seattle has been called the greenest office building in the world, or at least it was previously. It has 0 parking in it, and you walk and bike and public transit to it, and it's in the heart of Capitol Hill in Seattle, which is a dense neighborhood surrounded by housing and shops and restaurants. You can walk everywhere. I mean, that's the trouble. That's the conundrum. They're doing incredible things with the building, absolutely, but it's still located in the suburban area of Cupertino.
And requiring 12,000 employees to drive to work every day, or 9,000, or how many ever actually drive.
Right.
And
now, granted, a lot of those cars are probably pretty nice because they're Apple employees. So even if every car was an electric vehicle, a Chevy Volt or probably a Tesla, but even if every car was an electric vehicle, they only have 1,000 charging stations. So only 1,000 of those cars right now could charge up at work.
I'm sure if 5,000 Teslas started to show up to the lot, they would put in some more of those charging stations.
Yeah, absolutely. My buddy Lloyd Alter, who writes for Tree Hugger, who's awesome, by the way, if you don't follow him, he crunched the numbers, of course, because he's nerdier than I am. He said, okay, the average commute time in the Bay Area is 30 minutes, which is generous, by the way. I think it's more. And the average speed is only about 14.3 miles an hour, meaning that the average passenger miles per gallon in that 30 minutes is about 34.3 gallons of gas that are being used. That crunches out to 6,300 gallons of gasoline per day that Apple employees are burning just getting to and from work.
34.3 miles per gallon. You said 34 gallons.
Oh, yeah, miles per gallon.
You're getting excited there. So, right, 6,300 gallons of gas per day.
Every day.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That Apple employees are burning in that 30-minute commute to and 30-minute commute back.
Right. But is that Apple's fault, or is that just that's the way things are now?
No, you could blame the oil companies for that. You could blame the Eisenhower Highway Act of 1957. I mean, you could blame a lot of things, and by the way, Cupertino is super expensive because it's in Silicon Valley. So those are the people that can even afford to live close. I'm sure there are Apple employees that have to live far out because, for the quest for cheaper rent. They might live all the way down in San Jose, and their commute time would be even more.
Right. And then what's the bike lanes things?
So there are bike lanes all over campus. All told, there's 2 miles of walking, running, and biking paths around this 175-acre campus. And there are bike parking stations. There were no numbers on how many bikes it holds, but still. So you could bike to work, but you'd have to live probably in Cupertino. You're not going to live who's going to bike more than 10 miles to work every day?
It sounds like this isn't just simply a nod to being green, or, the word we like to use is greenwashing. Clearly, this isn't just greenwashing. It sounds like Apple's committed to, at least the mission they're touting. Whether the numbers align that way in the years to come remains to be seen. But it's it sounds like it's a big commitment on their part.
Allison Arieff, who used to be editor at Dwell and now writes for the New York Times, she had kind of a scathing piece about the Apple campus, which I'll include on the podcast page, but saying, is it really sustainable if you're building this 1 mile circumference spaceship on a 175-acre suburban campus? Yes, it's great you're planting trees, but is it really sustainable to do all that and not build a single unit of housing for your employees? And essentially dooming them to the expensive housing market of Silicon Valley.
Oh, that's an interesting thought. What's your take on that one?
It does seem weird, and there is precedent in the past that companies would build housing for their employees. In fact, a lot of our cities were made that way. I grew up in Philadelphia, New York, Boston. A lot of those East Coast cities, factories would come in and they were required to build low-cost worker housing. The Back Bay of Boston was mostly worker housing, if you remember.
Right.
There's an area of Philadelphia called Manayunk that was all considered worker housing that companies built so their employees would have an affordable place to live and they could commute easily to work. And this kind of vanished after the 1950 explosion of car use and suburban sprawl. But they're building this giant campus. Wouldn't it be amazing if they built some housing? And this is not completely unheard of because Google, who's also building a giant campus right now at this very same time, is been building housing as well. Facebook is building housing as well as their campus.
They are.
So it is happening.
I was just going to say, and there's a lot of that over near Santa Monica Airport, which was a heavily used airport in World War II. There's all kinds of, and there's a plane factory there. There's all kinds of old housing from that. When I don't know if it was Boeing or Northrop Grumman, but they built all kinds of little housing, which now the developers are trying to gobble up. But okay, so I was just thinking as you're mentioning that, do we live in a society today where employers build their employees housing? I can't think of much in recent memory where we do that just as a society.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't really happen anymore. The old model was the old IBM model where you'd go to work, they'd hand you a tie and a company car, and all the the IBM parking lot was all, it was all the same car in one of 3 colors. That kind of vision of corporate America. I think on the other hand, though, especially in Silicon Valley, which is the most expensive rents in the country, if not the world, if Google, Facebook, Apple want to remain competitive and they want to attract employees and they're asking the employees to live in the most expensive zip codes in the country, they're going to have to do something. They're going to have to subsidize it in some way. Otherwise, they're going to cease to be competitive.
Do you know more about the Google and Apple providing housing in terms of, is it apartments, is it houses? Do you know anything more about that?
So the Google and Facebook talks have been, Facebook wanted to essentially build these townhouses. They were pretty small. They were, what I would call micro units, 300 square feet type things. But the idea is for employees that couldn't find housing or need it, they'd have these micro units available. And they haven't built any to my knowledge yet, but they've certainly been talking to their respective cities about it.
I wonder. It's an interesting idea. And it on paper, it's nice that, hey, Apple just built a building to house 12,000 people. It'd be great if they provided some housing. But when you get in the reality of crunching those housing numbers, I think just like you were mentioning, we're not talking 3,000 square foot homes. We're talking 300 square foot apartments. And, who's going to want to live in those? I think, we want our own identity, right, as Americans. And I think, if we work at one of those big cush jobs, Google, Apple, Facebook, do we want to really live in their housing? It's kind of like I'm the failed designer. Like, why didn't I get out where I could at least make enough money where I can get my own house and not have Mama Bear, not live in Mama Bear's house?
There's that too, but anybody who's lived in San Francisco will tell you the story of looking for an apartment, how it's so awful. It takes about 3 months to find an apartment, in which time you're either sleeping on somebody's couch or living in some expensive corporate, icky housing, which is, costing you a lot of money. And then you show up at an open house and there are 50 other people with credit reports and applications filled out and then offering to pay for a full year of rent in advance.
Right.
And if you're not in the tech world, how do you compete with that?
Right.
So taking some of those tech people away and letting the non-tech folks be able to stand a chance in the craziness of the San Francisco Bay Area housing market would ultimately be a good thing.
Oh yeah, I'm still wondering if there'd be a stigma with that. Be like, oh, you're a Facebook employee? Oh, you live in Facebook housing? Oh, poor you.
Right.
Yeah,
well, they're getting that from all sides anyway, because there's this kind of culture war that's going on in the Bay Area between the tech bros who all work in tech and then everybody else.
Right.
But I've had friends that they show up for an apartment they see advertised on Craigslist. The apartment's advertised for, let's say, $3,000 a month for a one bedroom, and the tech person who doesn't have time to mess around will say, "I'll pay you $3,500 a month."
Right. Right.
Because it's worth it to them to pay the extra $6,000 a year to get the apartment and secure it. And for normal people, architects, we can't compete with that. We can't afford to.
No, you can't afford to. Do you think with Apple's initiative here, is this something where other tech companies are going to look at Apple and be like, hey, we want to do that too. We want to be more responsible. Or really, is it not practical for these tech companies to build these, 3.5 million square foot facilities?
No, absolutely. The other companies are certainly looking. Remember, you're in a very competitive market where each company keeps trying to outdo itself. And so Google started first with having a free employee cafe where they can eat whatever they want, and gourmet chefs coming in cooking meals every day. So then all the tech companies had to do that. Then Google came in and said, well, we're going to offer massages on site and free dry cleaning. And then all the companies did that. And then we're going to have bikes on campus so you can just grab a bike and go anywhere you want. So all the companies do. So each company is trying to boost the culture to become more attractive. And if you live in the Bay Area or you have friends that do, they bounce around from companies all the time because each company is trying to essentially poach employees from the other. It's bizarre. It's a weird. It's almost like the Hunger Games in a way.
Right. And it is this. Yeah, I've never worked in a corporate culture like that. Maybe some of the big architecture firms are like that. But I just look at that and be like, just pay me more money. Get rid of all that fluff. I don't need all that crap. I can buy my own lunch. Just pay me more money. That would be my take on it. But,
It's remember, their average employee age is about 28.
Right.
So they're at this point in their life where they like all the perks. I have an ex-girlfriend that works at Google, and every day she's posting one of the many perks she gets working there, and it makes me want to unfriend her because it's like, ugh, yeah, I get it. You live in a you live in a whole other world that none of us do.
I do remember 20 years ago interviewing for a firm in Boston. and one of their perks was like, free Snapple iced tea. And I used to think like, oh my God, you get free Snapple iced, like they give that to you, like you don't have to pay for it. I remember like that did stick in my mind, like, wow, that's pretty cool. They do that. It was free Snapple iced tea.
So take free Snapple iced tea, fast forward that 25 years, and then put it on steroids, and you'll have maybe a glimpse. So she posted the other day that Google employees were treated to a private concert by Fergie, and so she's posting pictures of Fergie like 5 feet from her. And it's like, yes, you have a wonderful life and we don't. I get it,
Yeah, but sorry, but Fergie's a has-been, and I don't know. But
wow,
that doesn't impress me.
and then the final thing that I want to say, and we'll include lots of links to these stories, including Lloyd Alter's piece, Allison Arieff's piece, and then the Wall Street Journal piece. But the last thing, and I'd really like to hear what everybody has to think about this. They call their main area where they all gather as employees, they call it the town square. So does that mean that corporate America and a corporate headquarters has now replaced what was once the true center of life for most Americans, the true town square? Is the transformation now complete?
Well, that is interesting, and I mean, talk about drinking the Kool-Aid. They're saying, well, we now have the town square for our facility and for our employees, but when you have 12,000 employees, you can probably build your own town square and call it town square.
But is it a town square if the town is not allowed to attend? It would only be the employees. So basically, only people paid by the company. It's
a private thing. So it's not really a town square, but they're still going to market it as that. Come enjoy the town square. We're only we and people like us are allowed to be. I mean, that's a private club.
You can imagine how all the urbanists on Twitter that I'm friends with were, collectively rolling their eyes when they're like, town square. Right. All the hardcore city planners and folks that I follow. It was kind of
right.
It was interesting to see that reaction, which was almost visceral. It was immediate. As soon as Tim Cook said it, they all were like,
Well, I think the urbanists and the planners, they're sensitive to when anybody throws around terminology like that. Like to an urbanist and a planner, town square, like I think that like if you're going to use town square, you better have the chops to back it up. Like that.
Exactly.
If you bastardize it, that cuts deep. And that's basically what Apple did, right? Because I'm not going to be able to go to Apple's town square. Nobody's going to be able to go to Apple's town square unless you're an employee. So it's not a town square by definition.
But they've called it that
of course.
In signage, so it must be true.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Well, so there we go. I think we covered everything about the new Apple building. This actually was interesting. I've learned more about it. I think I'm still, I see both sides of it. I applaud them for, really making more than just a hat nod. I mean, they've really invested time and money into making this green building. Whether it's net zero energy remains to be seen. But it's just so massive and so much parking that it's like, are you really helping the environment? I don't know. And that'll be debated long before, when we're dead and gone, that'll still be debated.
Right. So that's why I thought it was an interesting topic.
Alrighty. Well, on behalf of Eric Corey Fried, my name is David Doucette. This has been the ARE Podcast, and we will see you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the ARE Podcast. Be sure to visit architectexamprep.com and check out our other podcast episodes, video tips, and the ARE blog. Remember